Good evening, everyone. For today's presentation, we will run through our thinking process and the design process itself, just to explain the rationale behind the emerging master plan, which we will be showing later. So we will start with the kit of parts. Those are the spaces that are needed for a film studio. We've already discussed this previously, but we will bring a bit more of detail on those as we see them for this project, and also the need of clustering them and how they typically cluster in a film studio. Then we will bring the rationale to our site and see how we can bring those clusters to the site itself, trying to be integrated with the context and be respectful with all the site constraints. We will then show the proposal as it stands, and as Steve said, is an emerging master plan. So any of your feedback in today's session, it's more than welcome, and we will study those. And we will end up with two big topics: the emerging transport strategy and seeing how the master plan ties in with the wider context, and how are we trying to respond to our sustainability ambitions from a master plan point of view. So in terms of kit of parts, I'm aware most of you have seen this production timeline several times now. It was just a reminder of a film production has usually 5 stages. Stage 2, 3, and 4 take place in the film studios itself, and they all need different spaces. So for a pre-production, for the stage 2 pre-production, there's usually a need for flexible workplace. These are large floor places that we can just subdivide with temporary partitions in order to host different activities, such as auditions for the castings. Especially at this time of the production, we need office space, more traditional office space for planning, budgeting, and storyboarding of the movie. For Marlowe Studios, we thought that stacking the program was the best solution to optimize the floor plates, and so be very efficient with the land intake that we had with the development. And at the same time, we saw the roofscape throughout the development as a potential. So for some of the workshops, we think that we can use articulated roofscapes in order to break the scale of the building and make it feel a bit more human, bring a human scale to that building that, because of functional requirements, we need it to be quite a large floor plate. When it comes to stage 3, we then start the construction of the scenes and we start filming. So for those stages, we start needing a lot of the workshop space. We will need large workshops for the construction of the sets itself. And again, these are very large spaces, but that can be flexible and can adapt to different uses, and therefore can be temporary. The use of temporary partitions, it's promoted. And then we will have smaller workshops that usually these host design studios, for example, costume studios or makeup studios that are related for the scene creation and construction, but also they are used during the filming. And throughout the process, we will use compartmented office space that is used for activities that support the main activities, which are the construction and the filming. At this point, it also becomes quite important, the outdoor spaces in relationship to what happens within the workshops and later on with the sound stages. And again, we thought that stacking this program was really useful in terms of optimizing the floor plate, making sure that we were not building in more land that we strictly needed, and also creating a very kind of easy communication between the different disciplines that work within the film that film creation. Whenever we have flat roofs. We are exploring the use of those for green roofs and PV panels. And when we finish the construction of our scenes, we then bring them to the unit base and into our sound stages. So the sound stages are kind of big black boxes that have a very high acoustic envelopes and need to be able to adapt to any kind of construction inside to film to shoot different scenes of the movies. We are looking into optimizing our structures as much as possible in order to reduce the external height as much as we can, understanding that we do require an internal height that allows for those constructions or those scenes to be hosted inside. And we see these large floor plates as an opportunity to have extensive green roofs that will contribute to our water management strategy, and also to have a significant number of PV panels that will contribute to our energy strategy. And we go back then to our, we continue in our film production and get into our post-production phase, in which we go back into that typology that we had at the beginning, the pre-production one, with flexible workplace in the ground that can be used, that can be subdivided to do sound recording or for other complementary activities, and other kind of more traditional office space, again, for effects, sound mixing, activities. For these workshops, again, we think the roofscape it's the opportunity that we have to minimize our visual impact and bring a more a nicer scale towards the edges. So the previous ones, sound stages, workshops, and office space, create what is the core of the production clusters. But in order to be a place where companies want to work and where people really want to use these film studios, we need to provide also ancillary space. Some of the ancillary space, like this, the one currently in the screen, will be, for example, the studio hub that will have screen roofs, flexible spaces for events, hospitality, outdoor spaces that brings a bit more of vegetated canopies, and that allows people from the productions to meet. They are an opportunity to bring a finer grain or to change, to break the rigidity of the rest of the spaces, bringing other type of shapes or a bit more organic kind of shapes to those buildings. And in addition to those, to the media hub, we will then have other amenities dispersed through the master plan. One of the most important probably is the mobility hub. This one plays an essential role if we really want to promote the use of active mobility, or to use cycling to come to the site. So the mobility hub will host a series of storage of e-scooters, cycling, but also auxiliary space like showers, locker rooms, and will be related to a welcome point with some further food and beverage pavilions and a nice outdoor space. And then, as we've said in our previous CLGs, there's this ambition for Marlowe Studios to bring the film industry a bit closer to the community. That will be through providing training programs, but also arranging for a series of events in relation to the film industry. And so we need a kind of a building that is more public facing and can be open to the public, but also can be used for educational purposes in relation to the film studios itself. When we look at the relationship between buildings, we realize that there's quite a cyclic relationship between them. So we will usually use offices and that flexible workspace in the production. We will then go down to our workshop area and use it as for the construction of the scenes, move it out and finalize those scenes, maybe with the last assemble of pieces together in the outdoor spaces, the unit base, and bring it into the soundstage for filming, and back again to the use of offices that were used for pre-production, for post-production aims. So when we understand this relationship, we start to put together what is the core of a production. So in the production core, we will have usually the unit base in the center. Adjacent to that unit base, we will have the sound stages, and adjacent to the sound stages, we will have a series of workshops and office space. This will form the production core, and in order to create a production cluster, we will need to add a series more of sound stages. So usually one film production will use from 6 to 9 sound stages. So we will need to add a bit more of sound stages, more workshop space and office space, and a few amenities for that production. As part of so Marlowe Film Studios wants to deliver a development that allows for 2 film studios to happen at the same time in order to respond to the industry needs. Therefore, we will have 2 main production cores with their unit base, surrounded by sound stages, and bringing all those workshops to the perimeter. And this will be properly buffered with green buffer. So for us as master planners, understanding how these spaces work was essential to then understand how we can bring that and make Marlowe Film Studio a successful film studio. So when we decided to go and look at the site, and we started overlaying all the information we got from our surveys. This is our ecological surveys that identify the areas with higher ecological values. Our arboricultural surveys that identify all trees on site and those that are of higher interest, and then also our topography surveys in order to understand or to kind of define these 3 main zones. We understand that the plots to the north, which have poor grassland mainly, and it has a nice kind of tree canopy to the edge, will be the best place to locate our film studios. And then the southern plots, due to their ecological interest, also because we are closer to those lakes, will be free of development and will be used for outdoor filming or open recreational space, understanding that it might be that open recreational space can have an anchor building associated to it, but will not be fully part of the film studio itself. We are still trying, as Steve said before, to understand what is the best location or the best use of those southern plots. But from this initial kind of big zone, we started looking at our edge or perimeter conditions and seeing how we should buffer from the different paths, lanes, connections that we have in the border or in the perimeter of our site, and also of Westhorpe House Lane that crosses the site. And this gave us these kind of white areas that are those areas that we understand could be used for the development. In the middle of those areas, we decided to locate our production cores. We decided these strategic points because these unit base or production cores come with the sound stages adjacent to them. The sound stages are the buildings with the highest, that are the highest buildings of all the development. So under placing those buildings to the center of those areas will allow us to bring down the scale with the workshops and the offices, also providing that offices and workshops have a smaller grain, so smaller floor plates. And this will be able to come towards the south and the north of our site boundary, which are more sensitive due to the southern kind of areas of interest and the AONB to the north. We then decided to locate the trade clusters. Trade clusters are usually the spaces that are occupied by companies that are related to the film industry, but not strictly related to the production clusters themselves. So they usually need only workshops and office space. These are buildings of finer grain, smaller floor plates, and also lower, less height than the production cluster buildings. So we thought that these two locations were the best point to locate these trade clusters. And articulating the production cluster, the trade cluster, but also some of our relevant connectors like the east-west right-of-way and the main road to the north, we located some of our kind of hubs of amenities like the studio hub and the welcome point where we will have the mobility hub. We then thought that the middle plot, due to its close proximity to the film studio, might be the best location for outdoor filming. And we could use the southern plot, which is a bit more disconnected from the rest of the development, for outdoor recreation space and bringing that educational and cultural center that we've previously mentioned to that area. So that's a building that is open to the public, but somehow wants to bring the film industry closer to the community. We understand that to achieve this, we then need to first enhance the pedestrian path that we already have on site, and also provide secondary paths that can connect to the existing network. Through this process, we got to this concept diagram that we already presented in the last CLG. But I think that the most relevant part was the 4 key moves that we established. The first key move was to make sure that we are clustering the buildings the best way, and that we are allowing for flexibility between those clusters in order to make sure that our film studios are successful and are a place where productions such as Disney come and would like to work. The second key move was to try to distinguish ourselves from existing film studios by providing a more livable space to work with these active nodes that we previously mentioned, so the welcome area, the studio hub, and connecting those spaces with high quality streets for pedestrians that give us the opportunity to increase our tree cover through the development, maybe even use permeable pavements in the streets. So it's an opportunity to improve the quality of that space. Our third key move was the integration with the context. And this comes through the use of green buffers, the use of green roofs, but also the use of articulated roofs that kind of break the scale and also refer to more traditional constructions of the countryside. And the third one was to provide a recreational and cultural space for the community that was well connected to Marlow, to Little Marlow, and to the wider context. So from this concept diagram, we started creating, bringing the buildings that we needed. We had this initial draft of the master plan. As I previously mentioned, we are still developing. And it will be very nice to hear your feedback today. I'll zoom in to see it a bit better. So we kept a single access to site just because adding a secondary access could create more retention to the junction. So the best solution was to simplify to this, to maintain that single access. But then we maintained the Westford House lane as an access point for the park homes and the Westford House. And our main access to the site was coming straight to this welcome point area where we have the car park and this welcome point with a mobility hub and the security gate. Around that area, we had the first East cluster, production cluster, and the trade clusters. The East production cluster has, as we previously mentioned, the unit base in the center and a secondary smaller unit base to the south in order to provide access to a larger open space to these southern sound stages. Surrounding the unit base, we have the sound stages. And towards the more sensitive areas, the AONB and the southern areas, the right of way, we have the buildings for workshops and office, which provide a smaller floor plate. And as I previously said, have those articulated roofs or pitch roofs that help to minimize the visual impact. In bounding adjacent to the existing road that we are keeping, we are planning to have extensive soft landscape that it's gonna be, we will come back to it later on, but it will host kind of dense vegetation, and also it plays an important role in our water strategy. Sorry. The main objective is to have everyone to come straight to our side, park in the main car parking, and then through the welcome point, you have your pedestrian network down to the connecting the different areas within the development and down to the studio hub. There's also another kind of pedestrian crossing to the west cluster and the west cluster. So these are some early sketches for the welcome point. So as you can see, there's a small pavilion related to security gate, a mobility hub with some amenities at ground floor, and also all related to the storage of cycling, cycles, and other complementary uses. And then we have, as you can see, our main ambition is to keep the popular trees that are existing in that northern boundary and bring quite a lot of tree canopy and vegetation into the master plan itself. This is the first sketches of the Media Hub Square. So the Media Hub brings several opportunities. One is to break that rigid kind of layout that we have due to the nature of workshops and south stages. So the Media Hub brings a bit more of organic shapes that adapt to the context, greenery into the square too, and a bit of more open space for social interaction. If we look to the West Cluster production cluster, we again find the unit base in the center, and we have adjacent to them a series of sound stages, and then we have other kind of flexible outer space that could be unit base or maybe even backlot next to it. We again pushed all the workshops and offices closer to the southern boundary and to the northern boundary. And we have large soft landscape areas in the west towards the west boundary that again play a quite important role in our water management strategy. We have this kind of road parallel to the A404, which provides access, straight access to the backlot and to the southern plots. This is an early sketch, again, from the potential right-of-way with kind of young trees. But our ambition is to have that as dense as possible, so quite a lot of vegetation at low and medium scale too, but with those pitch roofs that somehow break up the scale of the buildings and bring us a bit of a more traditional building typology. And we want to enhance that connection of the rights of ways with the lakes and with the existing ecology, and enhance that existing ecology as much as possible. So how does our master plan tie in with the rest, with the wider context? As I've already mentioned, we have a single access, vehicular access loop from the A4155, and we keep the Westhorpe House lane to access the Park Homes and Westhorpe House. We also keep the Westhorpe Farm lane outside the development and will only be used in some occasions to service the outdoor space in the southern plot. In terms of if we really want to reduce the number of people that come with vehicles to site, we have to do two things. We need to provide public transport alternatives and promote active mobility. So for the first one, we are exploring, and this is quite an early stage, but we are exploring how we could connect our development and the site in general to Marlow train stations. So we believe that placing some hopper service routes that connect the train station with the development, with the park homes and our outdoor spaces, and also it could potentially link further to Bourne End. We are also exploring a potential new route that connects Highway Combi with Maidenhead, and that services our development, our master plan. This will also be used for those people coming to the park homes and those people coming to the southern plots. And especially what we need to do is to enhance the cycling and the pedestrian routes that connect Marlow with the development, but also Little Marlow and with the areas of interest within the context, such as Spade Oak. We understand this is an effort that needs to be done by all landowners, but we feel that connecting the train station with the development and improving existing cycling connections is essential to switch from people coming in vehicles to other means of transport. And that's why we are working on a green transport plan that is efficient and that can allow for that change. We also, as part of our sustainability strategy, think that it's not only about improving the connections to our site, but through improving the connections to our site, we are improving the connections with Little Marlow and Spade Oak, and also we are aiming to offer some recreational paths along those areas that we have identified through our surveys that have higher ecological value. We want to keep those areas with high ecological value, and we want to enhance them. And we are working with our ecologists to make sure that this happens. In terms of our landscape strategy within the development, we are trying to create a resilient landscape. So our kind of green buffers will use wild and local species. There will be used for water retention ponds in order to retain the water and make sure that we are able to manage fluvial water in the best way possible. Throughout our streetscape, we will find opportunities, we are trying to find opportunities for rain gardens and swells, and we are exploring the potential use of more permeable pavement. We cannot provide a tree canopy due to functional requirements. For us, the pedestrian connections that we previously mentioned are a big opportunity to bring more vegetation, increase the tree cover within the development, and bring those rain gardens and swells. And as I already mentioned several times, but the green roofs are an essential part of our water management and drainage strategy. At the same time that we want to create a resilient landscape, we need to build efficient buildings, and this is still a very early stage, but what we were talking about, the pitch roofs or the articulated roofs, they are not only a way of breaking up the scale and minimizing visual impact, but they also have good advantage in bringing in diffuse daylight, which means covering the space with daylight, but without increasing the heat gains too much. We are also looking into passive design solutions, shading devices, overhangs, high performance envelope, all of them contribute to make sure that our buildings are highly efficient. And again, green roofs are not only great from a water management perspective, but also they combine with PV panels, they make it way more efficient. So it is an essential part of our energy strategy. We've shown this section previously, and our Wilkinson are looking into our typologies. So this is a section through one of the typologies to the northern boundary, and see how we can maximize natural ventilation within the offices, maximize daylight through roof lights or through shaded envelopes, and make sure that the materials that we use are high performant and that we make these buildings the most efficient that we can. I think with this, I'll pass it back to Steve.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed, Sheila. I'm just going to pick up a few points on the countryside. Many of the things I'll mention here, I think, are broadly known anyway, but it's just to wrap up a little bit more on the context that we work within to reassure you, I suppose, that the design team are very well aware of what that context is. So next slide. First, of course, the country park. So the country park's not new, as many of you will know. It actually has its roots back in 2002 into an SPG, a supplementary planning document that was released by 2 district councils to deal with the gravel pits and, if you like, to deal with the scars, if you will, of some of that extraction work and the subsequent landfill that went on. I think in 2017, actually, there was then a more formal designation by Wycombe District Council of that as a country park. So it's many years later, you know, we're talking about 15 years later, within the local plan. So it's now designated, it's understood. And currently, leaping forward yet again, another 5 years, there's Little Marlow Parish Council have appointed a group to help generate a vision for this country park. So there's let's say a very long gestation period. And one of the key issues is not so much one here of policy or of intention, it's simply to do with ownership. This piece of land is substantially in private ownership, and not just by one individual, but by a number. So it's extremely difficult to make these ideas stick. And one of the ideas I think you know from some of the previous discussions is to begin to move forward on that a little bit, because one of those landowners is, of course, Project Dido, and if they can do something to begin to open up access into the countryside and to help build and sustain some of the principles that are within that SPG and will come forward, I think, through some of the work of the vision, then hopefully that's to be welcomed. And I think key to that and critical to that is going to be access, because Country Park at the moment is very, very hard to get into, very hard to know it's there if you're not a member of the planning committee. So it's a critical discussion. It's well understood as context. It's well understood, I think, that access to nature and to all its restorative potentials, to the lake and to some of the things that have been adopted as uses by many disparate groups should continue to be sustained, you know, such as the anglers at the lake and the dog walkers. So these thoughts are very much within the minds of DPL and the design team. And of course, we're in discussion with two key representatives of that vision group. So I wanted to reassure the room that things are undergoing, you know, constructive discussions on that particular front. Second slide. So that's a key piece of context. It's very important. I should probably just mention that it's an oversimplification, but it doesn't harm to say that if you understand that, you know, the buildings are built on a small part of the plot, it leaves a lot more of that plot as open land that can then be enjoyed as countryside. So I think that helps drive an idea of density, as does sufficiency of the film spaces. There are many other considerations beside, but I think that's been something very much helping to articulate that layout as it came. In terms of the wider context, of course, it is Greenbelt land, and to get permission to build on Greenbelt land, there's very, very specific things called very special circumstances, and the Secretary of State will normally do this, or delegate senior inspectors to define whether or not this application does constitute very special circumstances. But the case, I suppose, is largely made by the fact that you see the West of London film cluster here represented in the red dots and the black dots. The red dots are all of those that are consented or built, and the black dots is yet to come forward, including Marlow, you see there in the more or less the center of the screen. There's a sort of, I suppose, a globally recognized industry that is being nestled in all of these counties here within that golden belt, sort of 30-minute travel from central London. And it's not new, as you'll know. Pinewood was established back in the 1920s, 30s. So this film industry has had a long gestation. It's rooted into many of these landscapes, and some of them are, of course, on Greenbelt land. That's the way it has happened, because they need fairly large amounts of land to sustain their purposes. So strategically, the location is excellent. Transport is understood as an issue, and that's already been flagged up and will continue to be thought through. It obviously has to satisfy everyone that it's possible to do so. But you know, you could scarcely put a pin in a map in a location that seems to make more sense if it's a film studio that you needed to do. So I think that's why it's here. It's not a matter of happenstance, but the fact that it is in Greenbelt means that case has got to be one, and I think that's why the team is doing everything it can in terms of ecology, sustainability, biodiversity, and we'll continue to discuss all of those things as the scheme comes through. So those are two elements. Obviously, the area of outstanding natural beauty, Sheila has referred to earlier on. So these are all very sensitive things, and we will be continually referring to these as the design emerges. But I just wanted to say that we are aware of the context, and they're always present in the discussions that are happening. So I think that brings the presentation to a close. Now, oh, sorry, we did just touch on this earlier, these two parcels of land as to which would be the best for the backlot, the outdoor filming activities. And we are going to, in our breakup groups, return to this and get your views as to whether it should be the central area that's kept open, or what had originally been conceived as the more public land in C. Currently, it's considered that about 10 acres should be made available as public land within DPL's land holding. Where should it be? Is it better to put it in that location beside the lakes where there are already established uses and maybe some slightly higher levels of ecology, or should it go into the larger plot? Interesting to hear your thoughts on that tonight, and that can certainly help the master planning team.